Get away from that aircraft right now, or I'm calling security." The voice cut through the howling wind and driving rain like a blade. It belonged to Captain Jake Morrison, a man who believed that a uniform made him untouchable and that judgment was his right to pass. He stood beneath the wing of a $78 million Gulfstream G650ER, pointing an accusatory finger at a woman in a soaked hoodie who had just committed the unforgivable crime of walking toward his aircraft. What Captain Morrison didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes the woman he was screaming at would strip every stripe from his shoulders and end his career forever. What he didn't know was that the vagrant he was about to humiliate owned the very ground he stood on the plane behind him and, quite literally, his paycheck. Before we dive into this story of arrogance meeting its match, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if this moment already has your attention, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get intense. The storm that hammered Westchester County Airport on that October evening wasn't just weather. It was an omen. Lightning split the sky above the private aviation terminal, illuminating rows of corporate jets like sleeping giants. This wasn't JFK or LaGuardia where regular people flew. This was the playground of Manhattan's elite where billionaires parked their aerial limousines between Hampton weekends and European escapes. The rain came down in sheets so thick you could barely see from one hangar to the next. It turned the pristine tarmac into a maze of puddles and rivers where even the ground crew huddled under whatever shelter they could find. The wind whipped across the runway with enough force to rock the smaller jets on their landing gear. In the distance, the control tower's lights blinked rhythmically through the storm, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with the electric scent of lightning strikes. This was a $500 million parking lot where money talked louder than thunder and status meant everything. Walking through this chaos was Dr. Zara Mitchell, though anyone looking at her would never have guessed her title or her worth. At 34, Zara had the kind of face that people often underestimated. It was young, intelligent, and usually lit with the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. Tonight that confidence was hidden beneath exhaustion and weather-soaked clothes. She pulled her oversized gray Nike hoodie tighter around her head as the wind tried to tear it away. Her black leggings were splattered with mud from the service entrance, where her Uber had dropped her off, the GPS having malfunctioned in the storm. Her white Adidas sneakers squelched with every step, leaving dark prints on the wet pavement. In her right hand, she clutched a worn leather messenger bag against her chest, protecting it from the rain. To anyone watching, Zara looked like a graduate student who had taken a wrong turn, or maybe a member of the cleaning crew arriving for a late shift. Her natural hair was pulled back in a messy bun with wet curls escaping to frame her face. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that screamed wealth or status. She looked in every way like someone who didn't belong in this temple of privilege. But inside that battered messenger bag was a laptop containing research worth more than most people's houses, and the woman carrying it had a net worth that made some small countries jealous. Dr. Zara Mitchell held 3 patents that had revolutionized cancer treatment. She was the founder and majority shareholder of MitoCure Therapeutics, a biotech company valued at $2.8 billion. She had spent the last 72 hours in a laboratory at Mount Sinai, finalizing trials for a breakthrough treatment that could change how the world fought early-stage pancreatic cancer. She hadn't slept in a proper bed for 3 days. She'd grabbed naps on lab benches and survived on vending machine coffee and determination. She had taken meetings with venture capitalists while still wearing latex gloves and closed a $400 million funding round via video call from a supply closet. She looked rough because she'd been doing the work that mattered, not maintaining appearances. Zara had grown up in Detroit in a neighborhood where showing off meant becoming a target. Her grandmother had taught her that true power didn't need to announce itself, and her success had only reinforced that lesson. She could buy and sell half the people in this airport, but she didn't see the point in dressing like it. Ahead of her, through the rain and lightning, sat her destination. The aircraft was called the Midnight Phoenix, and it was as beautiful as it was expensive. The Gulfstream G650ER stretched nearly 100 feet from nose to tail, its custom matte black paint job making it look like it had been carved from obsidian. Silver accents traced along the fuselage, and the registration number N847ZM was painted in elegant script near the tail. This wasn't just any private jet. The G650ER was the pinnacle of business aviation capable of flying non-stop from New York to Dubai or Los Angeles to London. It could cruise at 51,000 feet above commercial traffic and weather in a cabin pressurized to feel like you were sitting at 4,000 feet instead of nearly 10 miles above the earth. The interior was custom designed with cream leather seats, a full bedroom, a conference room, and technology that would make NASA jealous. Zara had bought the aircraft 2 years ago for $73 million, then spent another $5 million on customizations. It was her mobile office, her sanctuary, and sometimes the only place she could think clearly above the noise of the world. She picked up her pace as the rain intensified her sneakers, splashing through puddles that reflected the aircraft's landing lights. She was tired, she was cold, and she just wanted to get home to her penthouse in Manhattan where she could take a proper shower and sleep in her own bed. Standing at the base of the aircraft's stairs, sheltered slightly by the jet's wing, were 3 people who were about to make the worst decision of their careers. Captain Jake Morrison looked like he'd been sent from central casting to play a pilot in a movie. At 52, he had the kind of rugged handsomeness that came with gray temples and a jaw that could cut glass. His uniform was crisp despite the humidity, every crease sharp enough to draw blood, every button polished to mirror brightness. His captain's stripes gleamed gold against navy fabric, and his white shirt was so perfectly pressed it looked uncomfortable. But Jake's good looks and perfect uniform hid a bitter man drowning in debt and resentment. His recent divorce had cost him half his assets and saddled him with alimony payments that consumed 60% of his income. He'd been forced to leave his position at Delta Airlines after what the company diplomatically called customer service issues, but what Jake still believed was political correctness run amok. In Jake's mind, the world had gone soft. People were too sensitive, too quick to cry discrimination, too eager to hand opportunities to people who hadn't earned them the way he had. He'd been flying for 25 years, had served his country in the Air Force, and now he was reduced to babysitting rich people's toys because some corporate lawyer decided his direct communication style was a liability. He brought that resentment to every flight, every passenger, every interaction. In his mind, he was the gatekeeper of aviation excellence, and he took that role seriously. Next to him stood Isabella Rodriguez, and she was documenting everything. At 28, Isabella had transformed herself from small-town Texas beauty queen to Instagram influencer with 200,000 followers who lived vicariously through her luxury lifestyle content. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. Despite the humidity, her makeup was camera-ready, even at 11 p.m., and her flight attendant uniform was tailored to show off the figure that had won her Miss Texas runner-up 3 years ago. Isabella didn't see passengers as people to serve. She saw them as content opportunities, walking storylines for her social media empire. Every flight was a chance to showcase private jet luxury celebrity encounters and the glamorous life of someone who served the ultra-wealthy. Her phone was always ready, always recording, always looking for the next viral moment. Tonight, she was live streaming to her followers, giving them a behind-the-scenes look at private aviation during a thunderstorm. Her audience loved the drama, the wealth, the exclusive access to a world they could only dream of entering. The third person was Tommy Walsh, Jake's 31-year-old nephew, serving as co-pilot. Tommy was tall and lanky, with nervous energy and the kind of weak chin that suggested a lifetime of following stronger personalities. He owed his position entirely to his uncle's recommendation, and he knew it. He lived in constant fear of disappointing Jake and losing the best job he'd ever had. Tommy wasn't a bad person, but he was a weak one. He had seen his uncle's treatment of passengers who didn't meet some unspoken standard of worthiness, and he had never found the courage to speak up. He told himself it wasn't his place, that he was just the co-pilot, that keeping his job was more important than making waves. Standing nearby, partially hidden by a fuel truck, was Marcus Rivera, a 26-year-old tech blogger who had built a following doing rich people watching content at airports. He live-streamed tours of private aviation terminals showing his 75,000 followers the aircraft and lifestyle of the ultra-wealthy. Tonight the storm had trapped him at Westchester, and he was making the best of it by filming luxury jets in lightning content. His camera was rolling, his audience was engaged, and he was about to capture something that would change multiple lives forever. The stage was set. The storm was raging. And Dr. Zara Mitchell was about to discover just how far people would go to defend their prejudices and what it would cost them when they chose the wrong target. Zara stepped onto the red carpet runner that led to the aircraft stairs, her muddy sneakers leaving dark prints on the pristine crimson fabric. The sound of her footsteps was swallowed by thunder, but her movement caught Captain Morrison's attention immediately. His reaction was instantaneous and visceral. "Security!" Jake shouted into the storm, his voice carrying over the wind and rain. "We've got a vagrant near the aircraft." He didn't ask who she was. He didn't check a manifest or consult his tablet. He took one look at a black woman in a hoodie walking toward his aircraft and immediately assumed the worst. In his mind, she was a threat to be neutralized, not a passenger to be served. Isabella's head snapped up from her phone, her influencer instincts immediately activated. This was content gold. She quickly switched from her weather live stream to a new angle, pointing her camera toward Zara with the kind of predatory excitement that social media had normalized. "OMG, guys. You are not going to believe this," Isabella whispered into her phone, her voice dripping with theatrical shock. "We literally have a homeless person trying to get on our billionaire client's jet. This is absolutely insane. I can't even believe security hasn't handled this already." She made sure to get Zara in the frame, focusing on the muddy sneakers, the soaked hoodie, the messenger bag clutched against her chest. To Isabella's 200,000 followers, this was entertainment. A real-life drama playing out in real time, complete with class conflict and the kind of cringe content that drove engagement through the roof. "Look at her, guys," Isabella continued, zooming in on Zara's appearance. "She literally looks like she just crawled out of a subway station. How did she even get past security? This is why we need better airport safety. You never know who's going to try to get access to these aircraft." The comments started flooding in immediately. Her followers, safe behind their screens, began passing judgment without knowing anything about the situation. "Call the police." "That's so dangerous. Rich people problems, LOL." The likes and shares began climbing as Isabella's algorithm-trained content machine fed off the drama. Zara stopped about 10 feet from the stairs, lowering her hood slightly so the rain could hit her face directly. She looked at Jake Morrison with the kind of calm that came from years of dealing with people who underestimated her. "I'm Dr. Zara Mitchell," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the storm. "This is my aircraft. Please step aside." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's face twisted into something between disbelief and anger. He'd been flying for over 2 decades, and he knew money when he saw it. Money wore Armani suits and Hermes scarves. Money arrived in Bentleys with security details. Money didn't walk through thunderstorms in hoodies looking like it needed bus fare. "Listen, lady," Jake said, stepping forward with the kind of aggressive posture that had gotten him in trouble at Delta. "I don't know what scam you're running, but this Gulfstream belongs to Dr. Zara Mitchell of Mitocure Therapeutics. That's a legitimate businesswoman, not some—" He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "Not some what? Not some black woman in casual clothes. Not some person who didn't fit his narrow definition of what wealth should look like." And you expect me to believe that a woman dressed like she's about to clean our bathrooms owns a $78 million jet? Jake continued, his voice rising with each word. Do you have any idea how much money that represents? Do you know what kind of person can afford something like this? Isabella was eating this up her live stream numbers, climbing as the confrontation intensified. Guys, she's actually trying to claim she owns the plane, she narrated to her audience. The audacity is absolutely unreal. I can't even imagine what goes through someone's head when they think they can just walk up to a private jet and claim ownership. Zara reached into her messenger bag slowly, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. She pulled out her wallet, extracting her driver's license, her MitoCure corporate ID, and her Black American Express Centurion card. She held them out toward Jake. "These are my identification documents," she said calmly. "The aircraft registration is N847ZM. You can verify that against your passenger manifest and the aircraft ownership records." Jake didn't even glance at the documents. He waved them away like they were contaminated. "Anyone can fake ID these days," he scoffed. "You think I was born yesterday? I've seen every scam in the book. People show up with fake documents, counterfeit credit cards, stolen identities, all trying to get access to aircraft they have no business being near." Behind him, Tommy Walsh was beginning to feel uncomfortable. Something about the woman's composure, the way she presented her documents, the calm certainty in her voice was making him nervous. He'd seen plenty of people try to talk their way onto aircraft they didn't belong on, but they were usually frantic, desperate, obviously lying. This woman was different. "Uncle Jake," Tommy said quietly, stepping closer. "Maybe we should just check the manifest to be sure." "We don't need to check anything," Jake snapped, spinning around to face his nephew. "Look at her, Tommy. Does she look like someone who owns a G650ER? Does she look like someone who could afford the fuel costs for a single flight, let alone the purchase price?" The rain was getting heavier, turning the confrontation into something surreal. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in stark black and white, the pristine aircraft, the uniformed crew, the woman in the hoodie holding her ground against the storm, and the prejudice. Isabella was still filming, still narrating, still turning someone's humiliation into content. "I'm literally getting soaked trying to document this for you guys, but I can't look away. She's just standing there in the rain, still pretending she owns a private jet. Like, at what point do you give up the act?" Marcus Rivera, the tech blogger, had moved closer with his own camera. His 75,000 followers were watching the drama unfold, and unlike Isabella's audience, some of them were starting to ask questions. "Why isn't she running if she's lying?" someone commented. "She seems pretty calm for a scammer. Something doesn't feel right about this." Marcus himself was beginning to sense that there was more to this story. He'd filmed plenty of airport drama, but there was something about this woman's demeanor that didn't fit the narrative the crew was pushing. She wasn't desperate or defensive. She was patient, like someone who knew that the truth would eventually come out. "People like you," Jake continued the phrase, loaded with implications he thought he was clever enough to avoid stating directly, "always think you can charm your way into spaces where you don't belong. But I've been in aviation for 25 years, and I can spot a fraud from a mile away." Zara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "People like me," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Captain Morrison Jake realized he'd stepped close to a line he couldn't cross openly, so he pivoted. "People who think they can intimidate hard-working flight crews with fake documents and sob stories. People who try to exploit others' kindness and professionalism." "My kindness?" Zara asked. "Zara, Captain Morrison. I've been standing in a thunderstorm for 10 minutes while you refuse to look at valid identification or check your passenger manifest. Where exactly do you see kindness in this situation?" Isabella laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the stormy air. "Girl, you need to give up this act. Like we all know what's happening here. You saw a fancy plane, thought you'd try your luck, and now you're doubling down because you're embarrassed. Just walk away and save yourself the humiliation. The comment section on Isabella's live stream was exploding with reactions. Some viewers were enjoying the drama, treating it like reality TV. Others were starting to feel uncomfortable with the dynamic they were witnessing. A few were even beginning to investigate, looking up the aircraft registration number that had been visible in several shots. Zara looked at Isabella for the first time, really looked at her. "Are you live streaming this interaction?" she asked. "Of course I am," Isabella replied proudly. "My followers deserve to see what really happens in private aviation. They love behind-the-scenes content, especially when it involves drama like this. And you think this is appropriate? Broadcasting someone's humiliation for entertainment?" Isabella shrugged. "If you don't want to be embarrassed, don't show up places you don't belong. This is a natural consequence of your choices." Tommy was becoming more agitated by the minute. Something about this entire situation felt wrong to him, but he couldn't find the courage to challenge his uncle directly. Jake had gotten him this job when no other airline would hire him, and he knew that crossing Jake meant losing everything. But the woman's calm confidence was eating at him. Scammers were usually nervous, aggressive, or desperate. They made mistakes, told inconsistent stories, revealed themselves under pressure. This woman hadn't wavered once. She knew the aircraft registration number. She had presented multiple forms of ID, and she was handling their aggression with the kind of composure that suggested she was used to being the person in charge. Uncle Jake Tommy tried again. "What if we just take a quick look at the passenger manifest? It would only take a second to verify." Thomas Jake said, using his nephew's full name with the kind of authority that had been crushing Tommy's spirit for years. "You question me in front of passengers one more time, and you'll be looking for a new job. Do I make myself clear?" Tommy's shoulders sagged. He looked at Zara, saw something that might have been disappointment in her eyes, and retreated back toward the aircraft. But as he did, he quietly pulled out his phone and started recording audio. Something told him he might need evidence of what was really happening here. The storm was intensifying, and the confrontation was reaching a crescendo. Zara stood in the rainwater dripping from her hood, holding documents that no one would examine, facing people who had decided she was guilty of the crime of not looking like their expectations. "This will be your last chance," Captain Morrison Zara said, her voice carrying over the thunder. "Look at the manifest. Verify my identity. Let me board my aircraft, or face the consequences of your choice." Jake laughed, a bitter sound that mixed with the rain. "Consequences? Lady, the only consequences here are going to be yours when security drags you off this tarmac. You want to keep playing games? Fine. Let's play." He pulled out his radio and switched to the security frequency. "Ground control. This is Captain Morrison at Hangar 7. We need immediate security response for a trespassing situation. We have an individual attempting to gain unauthorized access to aircraft N847ZM. As Jake made his call, none of them noticed that Marcus Rivera's live stream had caught the attention of someone with access to aircraft registration databases. In the comments, a viewer had posted a link showing that N847ZM was indeed registered to Mitocure Holdings, LLC, with Dr. Zara Mitchell listed as the primary contact. The truth was already spreading across the internet faster than the storm clouds across the sky. But Jake Morrison, Isabella Rodriguez, and Tommy Walsh were too invested in their assumptions to notice the ground shifting beneath their feet. The confrontation had reached the point of no return. In a few minutes, phone calls would be made, truths would be revealed, and careers would end. But for now, in the lightning and rain, it was just a woman with quiet dignity facing three people who had chosen prejudice over professionalism. The storm was about to break in more ways than one. Zara looked at the radio in Jake's hand, then back at his face. The rain had plastered her hair to her head, and water ran down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. But her voice remained steady, carrying a weight that should have warned anyone listening that they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. "You just called security on the owner of this aircraft," she said quietly. "I want you to remember that choice." She reached into her messenger bag again, this time pulling out her phone. The screen was wet, but she wiped it clean with her sleeve and touched the contact labeled Maya, emergency. Maya Williams answered before the second ring. She was Zara's executive assistant, her right hand, and her fiercest advocate. At 29, Maya had graduated from Harvard Business School with honors and could have taken any job on Wall Street. Instead, she chose to work for a woman she believed was changing the world, managing the complex life of someone worth nearly $3 billion. Dr. Mitchell Maya's voice was sharp with concern. It was nearly midnight, and Zara only called this line when something was seriously wrong. "Are you okay?" Zara put the phone on speaker and turned the volume all the way up, holding it out like a weapon. The sound of Maya's voice cut through the rain and reached every person standing near the aircraft. "Maya, I'm standing in a thunderstorm at Westchester County Airport." Zara said, her eyes locked on Jake Morrison's face. "The crew of the Midnight Phoenix is refusing to let me board." There was absolute silence on the other end of the line. Maya knew that Zara flew on her own aircraft at least twice a month. She knew the tail number, the crew schedules, the maintenance records, the insurance policies. She personally managed the $6 million annual contract with Platinum Aviation Services that provided crew and ground support. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you say the crew is refusing to let you board your own aircraft?" Jake's face had gone pale, but he was still committed to his course of action. "Who is this?" he demanded, stepping closer to the phone. "Another one of your accomplices. Maya Williams, executive assistant to Dr. Zara Mitchell, majority owner of MitoCure Therapeutics." Maya responded, her Harvard-trained precision cutting through the storm like a blade. "And who am I speaking to, Captain Jake Morrison?" he replied with forced authority. "And I'm telling you that whoever you think you're talking to, this woman is not Dr. Zara Mitchell. She's a vagrant who's been harassing my crew and attempting to gain unauthorized access to a private aircraft." The silence that followed was so complete that even the thunder seemed to pause. Maya's voice, when it came back, was so cold it could have frozen the rain mid-fall. "Captain Morrison," she said, pronouncing each syllable with surgical precision. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You believe that Dr. Zara Mitchell, the woman who pays Platinum Aviation Services $6 million annually for aircraft management, the woman whose signature is on your paycheck, the woman who could buy and sell the company you work for, before lunch is a vagrant Isabella who had been filming the entire exchange, suddenly stopped laughing. Something in Maya's voice, the specific mention of $6 million, the detailed knowledge of the aviation management company, was making her nervous. Her followers were still commenting, but some of the messages were starting to shift tone. Wait, what if she's telling the truth? $6 million annually. Someone should check this out. Tommy Walsh felt his stomach drop. $6 million annually. That was more than Platinum Aviation made from their next 5 biggest clients combined. If this woman really was Dr. Zara Mitchell, if she really was the owner of the aircraft, then they hadn't just made a mistake. They had committed career suicide. "There must be some misunderstanding," Jake said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried just minutes before. "This woman doesn't look like what Captain Morrison." Maya interrupted. "Please finish that sentence. Tell me exactly what you think the owner of a private aircraft should look like." Marcus Rivera, still live-streaming from his position near the fuel truck, watched his comment section explode with activity. His tech-savvy viewers were fast at work, and within seconds someone had posted a link to MitoCure Therapeutics' website. The company's About Us page featured a professional headshot of Dr. Zara Mitchell, and even accounting for lighting and makeup differences, it was clearly the same woman standing in the rain. "Holy shit!" Marcus whispered to his camera, forgetting to censor himself. Guys, I think she's telling the truth. Someone just posted her company bio, and it's definitely her. But Jake Morrison was too deep in his mistake to back down now. Look, I don't care who you claim to be on the phone, he said to Maya. I'm looking at a woman in a hoodie and sneakers who looks like she hasn't showered in days. The Dr. Zara Mitchell I've heard of is a respected businesswoman, not this. Maya's response was swift and devastating. Captain Morrison, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize to Dr. Mitchell. Allow her to board her aircraft and pretend this conversation never happened. Because the alternative is that I make 3 phone calls and you never work in aviation again. You're bluffing, Jake said, but sweat was beginning to mix with the rain on his forehead. Am I? Let me tell you what those 3 phone calls will accomplish. The first call goes to Jonathan Reed, CEO of Platinum Aviation Services, who will be very interested to learn that his captain has physically prevented the owner of aircraft N847ZM from boarding her own property. The second call goes to the FAA because denying aircraft access to registered owners raises some very serious regulatory questions. The third call goes to Dr. Mitchell's legal team because what you've done here tonight constitutes discrimination, harassment, and possibly kidnapping, since you're preventing her from accessing her own means of transportation. Isabella had stopped filming and was frantically trying to end her live stream. But it was too late. Thousands of people had already screen-recorded the footage, and the story was spreading across social media faster than she could contain it. Westchester incident was already trending on Twitter, and the aviation community was beginning to take notice. Tommy Walsh couldn't take it anymore. The weight of what they had done, what they were still doing, was crushing him. He looked at his uncle, the man he had idolized and feared in equal measure, and realized that Jake's arrogance was about to destroy them all. Uncle Jake. Tommy said, his voice shaking. I think we need to check the manifest. Stay out of this. Thomas. Jake snapped, but his authority was cracking. The confidence that had carried him through 25 years of flying was evaporating as the reality of the situation began to penetrate his prejudice. Maya's voice came through the phone speaker again, and this time it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Captain Morrison. I'm looking at Dr. Mitchell's calendar right now. She was scheduled to depart Westchester at 11:30 p.m. for a flight to her home in Manhattan. The flight plan was filed 6 hours ago. The catering was ordered yesterday. The fuel was topped off this afternoon. Everything was arranged for her arrival, which means you received a passenger manifest with her name on it. Jake's hand involuntarily moved toward his tablet, the one that contained the flight information he had refused to check. Maya continued, her voice relentless in its precision. Furthermore, Captain Morrison Dr. Mitchell has been in continuous contact with her laboratory team at Mount Sinai for the past 72 hours. She has been working on a breakthrough cancer treatment that could save millions of lives. While she was doing that work, making discoveries that will benefit all of humanity, you were deciding that she didn't deserve basic human dignity because of how she looked. The words hit like lightning strikes, illuminating the full scope of their mistake. This wasn't just any wealthy person they had misjudged. This was a woman whose work had the potential to change the world, a scientist whose research could touch every family affected by cancer, a human being whose worth was measured not in designer clothes or luxury accessories, but in lives saved and hope restored. Zara spoke for the first time since making the call, her voice carrying across the tarmac with quiet authority. Maya, please call Jonathan Reed. It's time. No, Jake said, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. Wait, let me check the manifest. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. But it was too late. Maya was already dialing, and the sound of the phone connecting echoed through the speaker. Jonathan Reed, CEO of Platinum Aviation Services, answered with the groggy confusion of someone awakened from deep sleep. "Maya, it's nearly midnight. Is everything all right with Dr. Mitchell?" "I'm afraid not." "Mr. Reed?" Maya replied. "I have Dr. Mitchell on the line, and she's standing in a thunderstorm at Westchester County Airport because your crew has refused to allow her to board her aircraft." The silence that followed was so profound that even the storm seemed to hold its breath. When Jonathan Reed spoke again, his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that comes from a man who has built his reputation on excellence and is watching it crumble in real time. "Put me on speaker," he said. "I want to hear this directly." Maya switched to speaker mode, and suddenly Jonathan Reed's voice filled the space around the aircraft carried by the storm winds and heard by everyone within 50 feet. "Dr. Mitchell," Jonathan said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Please tell me what's happening." Zara looked directly at Jake Morrison as she spoke, her voice calm and clear, despite the chaos around them. "Mr. Reed, I've been standing in the rain for 20 minutes. Captain Morrison has called me a vagrant, refused to examine my identification, and just called security to have me removed from my own aircraft. Your flight attendant has been live streaming my humiliation for entertainment content." The explosion of profanity that came through the phone speaker was so creative and sustained that it could have been considered art. When Jonathan finally paused for breath, his next words were delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. "Captain Morrison," he said, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" Jake Morrison, the man who had been so confident in his judgment just minutes before, could only stand in the rain and watch his career wash away with the storm water running off the aircraft wings. The reckoning had begun, and there was no way to stop what was coming next. Jonathan Reed's voice continued to fill the space around the aircraft, carried by the storm, and amplified by the realization that everyone present was witnessing a career-ending catastrophe in real time. "Captain Morrison," Jonathan said, his voice so controlled it was more terrifying than shouting would have been, "Dr. Zara Mitchell is not just a client. She is the client. Her contract represents 18% of Platinum Aviation Services' annual revenue. She has personally recommended our services to 12 other high-net-worth individuals, generating an additional $42 million in business over the past 2 years. Jake Morrison stood frozen in the rain, his perfect uniform now soaked and clinging to his body like a surrender flag. The numbers Jonathan was reciting weren't just impressive, they were devastating. 18% of the company's revenue meant that losing Dr. Mitchell as a client could trigger layoffs, could damage the company's reputation irreparably, could destroy the livelihoods of dozens of employees who had nothing to do with this moment of catastrophic prejudice. Furthermore, Jonathan continued, "Dr. Mitchell has never, not once in the 3 years we've served her, requested special accommodation, complained about service, or treated our employees with anything less than complete professionalism. She tips ground crews, sends thank-you notes to flight attendants, and personally funded the medical leave for Captain Rodriguez's wife during her cancer treatment last year. Isabella Rodriguez had gone completely still, her phone no longer live streaming. Her followers forgotten as the weight of what she had done settled on her like a physical force. She had filmed someone's humiliation, turned their pain into content, made entertainment out of discrimination. And now she was learning that the woman she had mocked was someone who had helped a colleague's family during a medical crisis. The revelation was spreading across social media faster than the storm could spread across the sky. Marcus Rivera's livestream had been clipped, shared, and reposted thousands of times. The hashtag Westchester Shame was trending nationally, and aviation industry professionals were starting to weigh in with their own stories of witnessing discrimination in private aviation. But the money, Jonathan Reed continued, his voice growing colder with each word, is not why I'm angry, Captain Morrison. I'm angry because Dr. Zara Mitchell is one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever had the privilege to serve. Do you know what she was doing for the past 72 hours while you were apparently forgetting how to read a passenger manifest? Jake shook his head, unable to speak. She was in a laboratory, Captain Morrison. She was working with a team of researchers to finalize clinical trials for a treatment that could extend the lives of pancreatic cancer patients by an average of 14 months. 14 months for people to see their children graduate, to celebrate anniversaries, to make peace with their families. 14 months of life that didn't exist before Dr. Mitchell's work. Tommy Walsh felt his knees go weak. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and quickly searched for MitoCure Therapeutics. The company's website loaded, showing Dr. Mitchell's photo and biography. She had graduated from MIT at 22, earned her PhD in biochemistry at 25, and held 17 patents for cancer treatment innovations. Her work had been featured in the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, and Science. She had testified before Congress about healthcare accessibility and had donated over $100 million to medical research foundations. Uncle Jake Tommy whispered, showing him the phone screen. "Look at this. Look who she really is." But Jake was beyond looking at evidence. He was trapped in the gravity well of his own mistake, unable to escape the terrible momentum of his prejudice. "This has to be some kind of setup," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it anymore. Maya Williams, still connected by phone, had not been idle during Jonathan's speech. Her Harvard training had kicked in, and she was conducting her own investigation in real time. As the executive assistant to someone worth nearly $3 billion, Maya had access to resources that most people couldn't imagine. Dr. Mitchell. Maya said, her voice cutting through the rain, while Mr. Reed has been explaining Captain Morrison's error. "I've been conducting some research of my own." She paused, and the sound of typing could be heard through the phone speaker. "It appears that Captain Morrison has some very interesting flight logs in his record. According to FAA databases, aircraft N847ZM has made 6 unauthorized flights over the past 4 months. Flights that don't appear on any official manifest flights, that generated no maintenance records, flights that seem to have been conducted for cash payments outside the normal booking process." The blood drained from Jake's face so fast he nearly collapsed. The unauthorized charter flights had been his secret, his way of making the extra money he needed to cover his alimony payments. He had used client aircraft to transport celebrities, politicians, and business executives who wanted to travel without leaving paper trails. He had charged premium rates, pocketed the cash, and falsified maintenance logs to cover his tracks. It was fraud on multiple levels: theft of aircraft time, falsification of federal documents, tax evasion, and breach of his employment contract. If Maya had discovered the flights, it meant the evidence was already documented in processes he couldn't access or alter. "That's impossible," Jake said, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "Is it?" Maya replied. "Because I'm looking at fuel receipts that don't match any official flight plans. Maintenance logs with timestamps that correspond to aircraft movement and credit card charges for catering services during periods when the aircraft was supposedly in hangar storage." Isabella, who had been silent since ending her live stream, suddenly spoke up. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I didn't know about any illegal flights. I just served drinks and took photos." Maya's response was swift and devastating. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have Instagram posts from your account showing you serving champagne on aircraft N847ZM during 3 of those unauthorized flights. You tagged the locations you used, hashtags identifying the aircraft, and you posted photos of passengers who were not on any official manifest. You didn't just know about the illegal charter operations, you documented them. The web of complicity was unraveling faster than anyone could follow. What had started as a simple case of discrimination was revealing layers of fraud, theft, and criminal activity that went back months. The storm that had brought them all together was washing away more than just the evening's rain. It was exposing corruption that had been hidden beneath the surface of professional competence. Marcus Rivera, still live-streaming to his audience, was struggling to keep up with the revelations. His followers were conducting their own investigations, cross-referencing social media posts, with flight records building a timeline of illegal activity that stretched back to Jake Morrison's hiring by Platinum Aviation Services. "Guys," Marcus said into his camera, "I came here tonight to film jets in a thunderstorm, and I think I just stumbled onto the biggest aviation scandal of the year. The flight crew that refused to let this woman board her own aircraft has apparently been stealing it for months. Tommy Walsh couldn't bear it anymore. The weight of his complicity, his cowardice, his failure to speak up when he knew something was wrong was crushing him. He pulled out his phone and opened the voice recording app he had been using to document the confrontation. "I have recordings," he announced suddenly, his voice cutting through the rain and chaos. "I recorded everything that happened tonight. Every threat, every racist comment, every refusal to check identification. And I have photos of the unauthorized flight passengers. I documented everything because I was scared this would happen someday." Jake turned on his nephew with the fury of a cornered animal. What I was scared?" "Uncle Jake," Tommy said, tears mixing with rain on his face. "I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I was too weak to stop it. So I documented it. I thought maybe someday I could use it to prove I wasn't the one making the decisions." Maya's voice came through the phone speaker one more time, cold and final. "Gentlemen, ladies, let me explain what's going to happen next. Dr. Mitchell is going to board her aircraft, and she's going to fly home to Manhattan. Captain Morrison and Ms. Rodriguez are going to be met by federal agents when they land, because unauthorized use of aircraft is a federal crime. Mr. Walsh is going to provide his recordings and photographs to investigators, and maybe his cooperation will be taken into account during sentencing." The storm was beginning to pass, but the reckoning was just beginning. Lightning still flashed in the distance, but the rain was softening from a torrent to a steady downpour. The drama that had played out on the tarmac was already spreading across the internet, shared and reshared by thousands of people who recognized it as a moment when prejudice met its match. Jonathan Reed's voice returned to the speaker, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Dr. Mitchell, I am personally driving to Westchester right now. I will be there in 30 minutes with a replacement crew. Captain Morrison and Ms. Rodriguez are terminated immediately, and they will be escorted from the premises by security." "Thank you, Jonathan," Zara said, speaking for the first time since the revelations had begun cascading. "But I think I'd prefer to handle this personally." She looked at Jake Morrison, the man who had stood in her way, who had judged her worth by her appearance, who had stolen from her while treating her like trash. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had just watched their tormentors destroy themselves. "Captain Morrison," she said, "you're fired." The words hung in the air like the final note of a symphony, simple and absolute. "You're fired." 2 words that carried the weight of justice, the consequence of choice, and the end of a career built on prejudice and theft. Jake Morrison stood in the rain, his captain's uniform now a costume that no longer meant anything. The gold stripes on his sleeves, the insignia on his shoulders, the authority he had wielded like a weapon, all of it was worthless now. He was no longer Captain Morrison. He was just Jake, a 52-year-old man who had destroyed his life in 47 minutes. "You can't fire me," he said. But the words came out as a whisper, not a declaration. "Only Platinum Aviation Services can terminate my employment." Zara pulled her phone closer and spoke directly to Jonathan Reed. "Jonathan, I believe Captain Morrison is confused about his employment status." "Not confused at all," Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "Jake Morrison, you are terminated for cause effective immediately. Your employment contract contains a clause specifically addressing discrimination against clients and another clause addressing unauthorized use of company aircraft. You've violated both, which means you forfeit all severance, all benefits, and all pension contributions. The financial blow was devastating. Jake's pension had been his only hope for retirement security after his divorce settlement. The severance package would have carried him through while he looked for other work. Now he faced unemployment with no safety net and federal criminal charges looming. But Zara wasn't finished. She looked at Isabella Rodriguez, who was still holding her phone like a shield against reality. "Ms. Rodriguez, you live-streamed my humiliation to 200,000 followers. You turned my discrimination into entertainment content." Isabella's voice was barely audible. "I was just doing my job. I create content about luxury aviation. I didn't know." "You didn't know that filming someone without consent while they were being discriminated against was wrong," Zara interrupted. "You didn't know that making entertainment out of someone's pain was inappropriate?" Isabella had no answer. Her entire career was built on documenting luxury experiences, often at the expense of others' privacy and dignity. She had never considered the human cost of her content creation, never thought about the people she turned into characters in her online narrative. Maya Williams, still connected by phone, delivered the next blow. "Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Mitchell's legal team specializes in privacy law and digital harassment. Your livestream violated several federal statutes regarding consent and publication of private moments. The fact that you did it while Dr. Mitchell was being discriminated against adds civil rights violations to the mix." Isabella's social media empire was already crumbling in real time. Her followers were abandoning her account by the thousands as clips from her live stream spread across other platforms. The aviation community, which had embraced her content, was turning against her as industry professionals shared their own stories of discrimination and called for accountability. But the most devastating moment came when Jonathan Reed's voice returned to the speaker with information that changed everything. "Dr. Mitchell. Jonathan said my emergency response team has arrived at Westchester, and they've brought someone with them who insisted on being here. Agent Zara Martinez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division wants to speak with you." Through the rain, headlights appeared in the distance. 3 black SUVs were approaching the aircraft, their emergency lights flashing red and blue through the storm. The vehicles pulled up in formation, and federal agents began emerging from each one. Agent Martinez was a woman in her 40s, Hispanic with the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. She approached Zara directly, showing her badge and identification. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm Special Agent Martinez. We've been investigating reports of unauthorized charter operations using private aircraft, and your assistant's phone call tonight provided the final pieces of evidence we needed." Jake Morrison felt his legs give out. He didn't fall, but he staggered backward until he hit the aircraft stairs. The federal investigation had been ongoing. His illegal charter flights hadn't been as secret as he thought. Someone had reported him, and the FBI had been building a case while he continued to dig his grave deeper. Captain Morrison, Agent Martinez continued, "You're under arrest for fraud, theft of aircraft services, falsification of federal documents, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." As Agent Martinez recited the Miranda warning, other agents approached Isabella and Tommy. Isabella was not arrested, but she was informed that she would be required to testify about her knowledge of the illegal charter operations. Tommy, because of his cooperation and his recorded evidence, was offered a plea agreement in exchange for his testimony against his uncle. The scene was surreal federal agents making arrests in a thunderstorm while social media documented every moment. Marcus Rivera's livestream had become the most watched content in his platform's history, shared by major news outlets and aviation industry publications. But Agent Martinez wasn't finished with her revelations. "Dr. Mitchell," she said, "our investigation discovered that Captain Morrison's illegal charter operations involved more than just your aircraft. He was part of a network that provided transportation for individuals trying to avoid federal scrutiny. Some of his passengers were under investigation for money laundering, tax evasion, and other financial crimes." The scope of Jake's criminal activity was far beyond simple theft of aircraft time. He had unknowingly become part of a criminal transportation network helping wealthy criminals move around the country without creating official travel records. His greed had made him an accessory to crimes he didn't even know about. As Jake was handcuffed and led toward one of the federal vehicles, he looked back at Zara one last time. The woman he had dismissed as a vagrant, humiliated in front of cameras, and treated like garbage, was standing calmly in the rain watching justice unfold with the patience of someone who had always known that truth would prevail. "I'm sorry," he called out to her as Agent Martinez guided him toward the SUV. "I made a mistake." Zara looked at him for a long moment, rain dripping from her hood, her messenger bag still clutched against her chest. When she spoke, her voice carried across the tarmac with perfect clarity. "Captain Morrison, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to judge me by my appearance rather than my identity. You chose to steal from me while treating me with contempt. You chose prejudice over professionalism and criminality over character. Those weren't mistakes. Those were decisions, and decisions have consequences." Jake Morrison was placed in the back of the federal vehicle. His aviation career ended, his freedom forfeited, his future reduced to legal proceedings and prison time. The man who had thought himself the gatekeeper of aviation excellence had become its cautionary tale. Isabella Rodriguez was escorted to a separate vehicle for questioning her social media career. In ruins, her reputation destroyed by the same platform she had used to destroy others. The woman who had turned discrimination into entertainment content had become the subject of that content herself. Tommy Walsh, his cooperation secured and his uncle's shadow finally lifted, stood in the rain watching the consequences of years of cowardice and complicity play out in flashing police lights and federal badges. Jonathan Reed arrived just as the arrests were concluding, his emergency response team deploying to ensure Dr. Mitchell's safe departure. He approached Zara directly, his face showing the strain of watching his company's reputation damaged by employees who had forgotten that service meant serving everyone with dignity. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, "I cannot begin to express my apologies for what you've experienced tonight. This is not who Platinum Aviation Services is, and it's not who we will ever be again." Zara looked at him, this CEO who had built his company on excellence and watched it nearly destroyed by prejudice. "Jonathan," she said, "what matters now is what you do next. How do you ensure this never happens to anyone else?" Jonathan nodded, understanding that this moment was bigger than just one customer complaint or one employee termination. This was a reckoning that would reshape how his company operated, how his industry functioned, and how discrimination was addressed in private aviation. "We're implementing immediate changes," he said. "Mandatory bias training for all crew members, anonymous reporting processes for passengers who experience discrimination, and partnership with civil rights organizations to ensure our standards meet the highest ethical requirements." But Zara had something else in mind, something that would extend beyond one company or one industry. "Jonathan," she said, "I want to propose something bigger. I want to create a foundation that addresses discrimination in luxury services across all industries. Aviation, hospitality, retail, anywhere that assumptions about appearance affect treatment." The idea was ambitious and powerful, using her wealth and influence to create changes that would protect everyone from the kind of treatment she had experienced. It would be her legacy, built from a moment of injustice and transformed into a force for change. As the federal agents completed their work and the crime scene was documented, Zara finally prepared to board her aircraft. The Midnight Phoenix sat waiting its stairs, extended its interior lights, glowing warmly through the storm. Justice had been served, criminals had been arrested, and consequences had been delivered. But the most important part of the story was still to come, what would be built from the ashes of this terrible night. 6 months later, the tremors from that stormy night at Westchester County Airport were still reshaping the aviation industry. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan had become the stage for the final act of Jake Morrison's downfall, and the consequences extended far beyond one man's criminal sentencing. Judge Patricia Williams, a 58-year-old African-American woman with 3 decades of federal judicial experience, looked down at Jake Morrison from her bench. He stood in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, the gold stripes and aviation authority replaced by the uniform of the convicted. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of justice, "you have pleaded guilty to 14 federal charges, including aircraft fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and civil rights violations. Your actions didn't just harm Dr. Zara Mitchell personally. They damaged the integrity of an entire industry." The sentencing hearing had drawn national media attention. The story of discrimination meeting justice had resonated far beyond aviation circles, becoming a symbol of how prejudice and criminality often intersected and how accountability could create change. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Judge Williams continued, "You will pay restitution of $847,000 to Dr. Mitchell and Platinum Aviation Services for the unauthorized use of aircraft and services. Additionally, your commercial pilot license is permanently revoked, and you are banned from working in any capacity within the aviation industry." Jake Morrison, the man who had once believed that a uniform gave him the right to judge others, had lost everything: his freedom, his career, his reputation, and his future. The prejudice that had driven his actions had consumed his life completely. Isabella Rodriguez's fate was different but equally devastating. Though she faced no criminal charges, the civil lawsuit filed by Zara's legal team had destroyed her financially and professionally. The $2.3 million judgment for privacy violation and discrimination documentation had bankrupted her, forcing the sale of her apartment, her car, and her designer wardrobe. More importantly, her social media career had evaporated overnight. The 200,000 followers who had once engaged with her luxury lifestyle content had abandoned her platform en masse. Sponsors had dropped her contracts, partnerships had been terminated, and the influencer economy that had sustained her lavish lifestyle had rejected her completely. She now worked at a retail store in Austin, Texas, her hometown, serving customers who occasionally recognized her from the viral videos of her humiliating Dr. Mitchell. The irony was perfect. The woman who had turned others into content had become content herself, a cautionary tale about the consequences of digital cruelty. Tommy Walsh's cooperation with federal authorities had earned him a reduced sentence of probation and community service, but his aviation career was over. The nephew, who had been too weak to challenge his uncle's criminality, had found strength in truth, but too late to save his profession. He now worked as a flight simulator technician, helping train new pilots while being permanently barred from flying himself. But the most significant changes weren't happening in courtrooms or bankruptcy proceedings. They were happening in boardrooms, training centers, and corporate policies across the aviation industry. Platinum Aviation Services had undergone a complete cultural transformation under Jonathan Reed's leadership. The company had spent $2 million on comprehensive bias training for all employees, partnering with the NAACP and other civil rights organizations to develop programs that addressed not just overt discrimination, but the subtle prejudices that influenced daily interactions. Every crew member now underwent quarterly sensitivity training, and passenger feedback processes had been redesigned to specifically address discrimination complaints. Anonymous reporting mechanisms allowed employees to flag problematic behavior without fear of retaliation, and diversity metrics became part of executive performance evaluations. Most importantly, the Morrison Protocol had been implemented. Any passenger complaint involving discrimination triggered immediate investigation by senior management, with zero tolerance for employees who allowed prejudice to influence their service. The changes rippled throughout the private aviation industry as other companies rushed to avoid becoming the next viral discrimination scandal. NetJet's FlexJet and other major providers implemented similar training programs, and industry associations began requiring bias awareness certification for all crew members. The Federal Aviation Administration had also taken notice. Administrator Rebecca Johnson announced new regulations requiring private aviation companies to report discrimination complaints, maintain diversity training records, and submit to periodic civil rights audits. The agency that regulated aircraft safety now also regulated passenger dignity. But Dr. Zara Mitchell wasn't satisfied with industry-specific changes. Her vision was broader, more ambitious, and more personally meaningful. Using the $3 million settlement from Isabella's lawsuit and an additional $50 million from her personal fortune, she had established the Dignity Initiative, a foundation dedicated to combating discrimination in all luxury service industries. The foundation's work extended far beyond aviation. They documented discrimination in high-end hotels, exclusive restaurants, luxury retail stores, and private clubs. They provided legal support for victims of service discrimination, funded bias training programs, and created accountability processes that made prejudice financially untenable for businesses. The Foundation's most innovative program was the Secret Shopper Initiative, where individuals from diverse backgrounds visited luxury establishments while dressed in casual clothes, documenting how they were treated compared to obviously wealthy customers. The results were published in quarterly reports that name and shamed businesses while celebrating those that provided consistent, respectful service. Within 6 months, the Dignity Initiative had documented over 300 cases of appearance-based discrimination across 12 major cities. Hotels had changed their guest services protocols, restaurants had retrained their hostess staff, and retail stores had implemented customer service standards that focused on respect rather than assumptions about purchasing power. Marcus Rivera, the tech blogger whose live stream had captured the original confrontation, had parlayed his accidental journalism into a career with CNN as their digital justice correspondent. His beat involved investigating viral moments of discrimination and following up on their long-term consequences, ensuring that internet outrage translated into meaningful change. His follow-up reporting on the Westchester incident had won him a Peabody Award for digital journalism, and his platform had grown to over 2 million followers, who looked to him for authentic coverage of social justice issues in real time. Miguel Santos, the ground crew supervisor who had tried to intervene during the original confrontation, had been promoted to Director of Ground Operations for Platinum Aviation Services. His integrity during that difficult night had been rewarded with increased responsibility and the authority to ensure that ground crews understood their role in maintaining customer dignity. The aviation industry publication Flying Magazine had featured Miguel on their cover with the headline, "The Man Who Spoke Up," highlighting how his willingness to challenge authority had contributed to industry-wide changes. His story inspired other service employees to report discrimination when they witnessed it, knowing that courage would be supported rather than punished. The legal precedent set by Dr. Mitchell's case had emboldened other victims of service discrimination to come forward. Civil rights attorneys reported a 340% increase in discrimination lawsuits against luxury service providers, with many cases citing the Mitchell decision as supporting precedent. More importantly, many businesses were settling these cases quickly and implementing immediate policy changes rather than fighting lengthy legal battles that would generate negative publicity. The financial and reputational costs of discrimination had become too high for most companies to risk. The story had also inspired academic research and corporate training programs. Harvard Business School had developed a case study called The Hoodie Incident, When Assumptions Destroy Value, which was now required reading in their MBA program. The case examined how prejudice could lead to criminal activity, financial loss, and reputational destruction. Corporate training companies had created simulation programs where employees experienced service scenarios from the perspective of customers who didn't fit traditional wealth stereotypes. The programs were being implemented by luxury brands across multiple industries, fundamentally changing how service staff were trained to interact with diverse customers. But perhaps the most meaningful change was happening in the lives of individuals who had been inspired by Dr. Mitchell's example. Social media was filled with stories of people who had found the courage to challenge discrimination when they witnessed it, knowing that standing up for dignity was both morally right and socially supported. The hashtag Dignity Matters had become a rallying cry for respectful service, with customers documenting positive interactions with businesses that treated everyone with equal respect, regardless of appearance. The movement had created positive incentives for good behavior rather than just punishment for bad behavior. Dr. Zara Mitchell herself had become something she never sought to be a symbol of quiet strength, meeting injustice with grace. Speaking requests flooded her assistant Maya's inbox from universities, corporations, and civil rights organizations. Her TED Talk. The Price of Prejudice. How Assumptions Destroy Value had been viewed over 8 million times, but Zara remained focused on her original mission, saving lives through medical research. The MitoCure cancer treatment that she had been perfecting during those 72 hours in the laboratory had successfully completed clinical trials and received FDA approval. The treatment was extending lives, giving families more time together, and fulfilling her deeper purpose beyond wealth or recognition. The Midnight Phoenix still flew regularly, carrying Dr. Mitchell to medical conferences, research facilities, and foundation meetings around the world. But now it was staffed by crew members who understood that service meant serving everyone with dignity, and that excellence meant excellence for all passengers, regardless of their appearance or assumptions about their worth. 1 year after the storm that changed everything, Dr. Zara Mitchell stood once again on the tarmac at Westchester County Airport. But this time the sky was clear, the sun was shining, and she wasn't alone. Beside her walked 12-year-old Aisha Santos Miguel's daughter, whose eyes were wide with wonder as she approached the Midnight Phoenix for the first time. Aisha had dreamed of becoming a pilot since she was 6 years old, but had never seen herself represented in the aviation world until her father told her about Dr. Mitchell's story. "Is it really yours?" Aisha asked, her voice filled with awe as she looked up at the sleek black aircraft. Zara smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams that had seemed impossible from her neighborhood in Detroit. "It really is," she said gently. "And today you're going to see how it feels to fly above the clouds." The new crew greeting them was led by Captain Maria Gonzalez, a 42-year-old Latina pilot who had been personally recruited by Jonathan Reed as part of Platinum Aviation Services' diversity initiative. Standing beside her was flight attendant David Kim, a former teacher who had entered aviation through a scholarship program funded by the Dignity Initiative. Dr. Mitchell, Captain Gonzalez, said with genuine warmth, "It's an honor to have you and our special guest aboard today." There was no judgment in her eyes, no assumption about worthiness, no prejudice disguised as professionalism, just respect, competence, and the kind of service that recognized every passenger's inherent dignity. As they climbed the stairs to board the aircraft, Zara felt a profound sense of completion. The steps that had once been blocked by bigotry were now open to a young girl whose dreams were being encouraged rather than dismissed, whose potential was being recognized rather than ignored. Inside the cabin, the transformation was complete. The same cream leather seats were arranged exactly as they had been that stormy night, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The space that had once been charged with tension and discrimination now hummed with possibility and hope. Aisha moved through the cabin like an explorer discovering a new world, touching surfaces, examining controls, asking questions that revealed both curiosity and intelligence. She was particularly fascinated by the communications setup that allowed the aircraft to stay connected with ground control centers around the world. "Dr. Mitchell," Aisha said, settling into one of the passenger seats, "my dad told me what happened to you here. He said you stayed calm even when people were mean to you. How did you do that?" Zara sat across from her, remembering that night when staying calm had seemed impossible, when dignity had required every ounce of strength she possessed. "I remembered who I was," she said simply. "Not who they thought I was, but who I really was. I knew that their opinions couldn't change my worth and that eventually the truth would speak louder than their prejudice. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Zara pulled out her tablet and opened a video message that had been sent to her that morning. The sender was Dr. Patricia Williams, a 67-year-old woman from Atlanta whose life had been extended by 18 months thanks to the MitoCure cancer treatment that Zara had been perfecting during those exhausting 72 hours in the laboratory. Dr. Mitchell, the woman said from her hospital bed surrounded by family, "I wanted you to know that I got to see my granddaughter's first birthday because of your work. I got to teach her to say my name. I got to hold her while she took her first steps. That's what your research gave me time to love and be loved." Zara showed the video to Aisha, whose eyes filled with tears as she understood the connection between scientific work and human impact. "That's why you do this?" Aisha asked. "That's why we all do this," Zara replied. "Every dream we pursue, every challenge we overcome, every moment we choose dignity over defeat, it all connects to something bigger than ourselves." The aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing through the layers of atmosphere that had once seemed like barriers but now felt like invitations. As they reached cruising altitude, Captain Gonzalez's voice came over the intercom with an invitation that would have been unthinkable during the previous crew's tenure. "Dr. Mitchell, if your young guest would like to visit the cockpit, she's more than welcome." Aisha's face lit up with joy that was so pure it made Zara's heart ache with memory and hope. They made their way forward to the cockpit, where Captain Gonzalez explained the instruments, the navigation processes, and the physics of flight with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved sharing her passion. "Could I really become a pilot someday?" Aisha asked, her hands hovering reverently over controls she didn't dare touch. "Not could," Captain Gonzalez replied firmly. "Will. If you want it, if you work for it, if you never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in this seat, you absolutely will become a pilot." As they returned to the main cabin, Zara felt the weight of legacy settling around her like a comfortable coat. The events of that stormy night had been painful, humiliating, and infuriating. But they had also been transformative not just for her, but for an entire industry, and for countless individuals who would benefit from the changes that followed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya Williams, who was now the executive director of the Dignity Initiative. "The quarterly report is ready," the message read. 342 businesses have changed their service policies. 28 discrimination lawsuits settled with policy changes. 156,000 service workers trained in dignity protocols. You started something beautiful. But the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source. Tommy Walsh, the former co-pilot who had found his courage too late to save his aviation career, but in time to save his integrity. Dr. Mitchell. His message read, "I want you to know that I speak at high schools now, talking to young people about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I tell them about you, about your grace under pressure, about how you turned injustice into change. I tell them that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear hoodies and carry hope." As the Midnight Phoenix began its descent toward Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, the same airport where everything had changed, Zara looked out at the landscape below. The world looked different from 40,000 feet, but it also looked the same. There were still people down there facing discrimination, still individuals being judged by their appearance, still networks that needed changing. But there were also more people willing to speak up, more businesses committed to dignity, more young people like Aisha who were being encouraged to dream without limits. The ripple effects of one night's courage were still spreading, still creating positive change in ways that couldn't be measured or quantified. The aircraft touched down smoothly, and as they taxied to the terminal, Zara saw something that filled her with profound satisfaction. Posted prominently in the airport terminal was a sign reading "Dignity in Service. All passengers deserve respect. regardless of appearance or assumptions. Westchester County Airport Management. The airport where she had been humiliated had become a symbol of the change she had inspired. The tarmac where she had stood in the rain was now a place where respect was policy, not preference. As they prepared to disembark, Aisha turned to Dr. Mitchell with the kind of serious expression that children wore when they were processing something important. "Dr. Mitchell," she said, "when I become a pilot, I want to be like you, not just flying planes, but making sure everyone gets treated right." Zara felt tears sting her eyes, remembering her own childhood dreams and the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. "Aisha," she said, "you don't have to be like me. You just have to be completely authentically yourself. That's enough to change the world." They stepped out of the aircraft together, the woman who had transformed her humiliation into hope, and the girl who represented the future that was now possible. The sun was setting over Westchester County Airport, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Behind them, the Midnight Phoenix sat quietly on the tarmac, no longer just a machine for transportation, but a symbol of what happened when dignity met prejudice and dignity won. The aircraft that had been the site of discrimination had become a classroom for possibility, a vehicle not just for physical travel, but for social change. Dr. Zara Mitchell walked across the tarmac one more time, her footsteps echoing with the confidence of someone who had faced her worst moment and transformed it into her greatest legacy. The storm had passed, the justice had been served, and the changes had taken root. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single person refusing to accept that they don't deserve respect. Sometimes the most important victories happen when quiet dignity faces loud prejudice and doesn't back down. And sometimes the most lasting change comes from turning personal pain into universal progress. As Zara climbed into her car for the drive back to Manhattan, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that the next person who walked onto an airport tarmac in casual clothes would face a different world than she had. A world where assumptions about worth were challenged, where respect was standard, and where dignity was not negotiable. The rain had stopped. The sun was shining. And somewhere in the sky above the next generation of dreamers was preparing to soar. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that respect isn't earned by how you look, but by who you are, then I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't up for debate. And subscribe to this channel because we're building a community that believes in justice, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been judged by your appearance? How did you handle it? Your story matters, and this community is here to support you. Until next time, remember that your dreams are valid, your dignity is non-negotiable. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept less than the respect you deserve.